high view of the law reminds us that God accepts us on the basis of Christ's perfection, not our progress. Grace, properly understood, is the movement of a holy God toward an unholy people. He doesn't cheapen the law or ease its requirements. He fulfills them in His Son, who then gives us His righteousness. Okay, now, the reason I even bring that to your attention is because I want to warn you ahead of time that as we make our way through these commandments, we're not going to dumb down the law and make it a doable checklist on how to be good. That's cheapening the law. That's dumbing the law down. That's lowering the bar to such a degree that we begin to believe, actually, we can pull it off. We can do this. We're going to explore the highness of the law's demands and the ways that we fall short of each one. And then we're going to explore the beautiful ways that Jesus specifically met the demands on our behalf so that we can be free. We saw that last week, and I just mentioned it a minute ago. Jesus was charged with being, by the Pharisees, he was charged with being an antinomian, someone who was against the law, someone who was sweeping God's high demands under the rug. And Jesus, to counter that, said, I have not come to abolish the law. I've not come to abolish the law. I've actually come to fulfill the law. What theologians refer to as Christ's active obedience. The very fact that He came to fulfill every jot and tittle of the law on our behalf because we failed at every point in keeping every jot and tittle of the law. Because the gospel is good news, and this really is the heartbeat of the gospel. The gospel is the good news that the one who makes the demands also in Jesus meets the demands. That's glorious good news. It's news that you and I don't deserve to hear. That's the radicality of grace at work, that the one who makes these demands also meets these demands perfectly in the person of Jesus. So we're going to be making our way through each of these, and this week I want to look just at the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, Martin Luther said that the first commandment is foundational. And the reason he said that is because failure to keep the first commandment is a failure to keep all the commandments, because all of the other commandments are dependent on the first commandment. So all of the other commandments that we read, commandment 2 through 10, are dependent on our keeping the first commandment. If we break the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, that is in essence breaking all the other commandments. Because all the other commandments are dependent on the first one. Now, at first glance, it may seem like Christian people do okay with this one, you know? We get a little bit down the list and we can see how, I've broken this one and I've broken that one. But when it comes to the first one, we Christian people typically think we're doing okay with this one. After all, we're not atheists, you know? We believe in God. We're not agnostics. We believe in God. We believe that there's only one God, and we believe that God is who He says He is, and He is real. He's not some fairy tale. We actually believe that God exists. We believe in Him. But to read the commandment that way and to think that we're pulling it off simply because we believe there's a God and we aren't atheists or agnostics or something like that is a failure to understand what's actually going on here. You see, this commandment renders every single one of us guilty. Christian people, non-Christian people. Inside the church people, outside the church people. Religious people, non-religious people. A friend texted me last night and said, I've got an idea for you when it comes to preaching the first commandment. And I said, what is it? And this is what he said. I'm going to help you with the first commandment. Read it and say, you have all failed this morning before you even got out of bed because everything in your life you have done to serve yourself in some way. Then announce the gospel and serve communion. Okay, that was That was the idea. Okay, this is that, and I could have done that. Maybe we should have done that, and the sermon would be over now, and we could celebrate communion together. But the fact of the matter is this: the first commandment is addressing idolatry. It's not first addressing atheism. It's not first addressing some agnostic worldview. It's addressing idolatry, and idolatry is not what you think it is. It's not what typically comes to your mind. It's not what typically comes to my mind. You see, we think of idols. When we think of idols, we typically think of people who bow down to statues. People in far off lands who, make images that they bow down to, false gods, people in tribes in far off lands. But the Bible defines idolatry much deeper than that. In fact, the Bible defines idolatry much more broadly than that. The Bible defines idolatry as anything more important to you than God. Anything that your heart and your imagination absorb more than God. And what that means is that idols are not just bad things like a thirst for money or a thirst for power. Idols are not just bad things. They can actually also be good things like your kids. Getting good grades, a dream, an ambition, a good dream, a worthy ambition. Anything that we depend on that is smaller than God to invest our lives with ultimate meaning and value and worth and purpose and those sorts of things can be an idol. And so that means that idols are not just the bad things in our life, but idols can oftentimes be the good things in our life. In fact, idols are oftentimes the good things in our life. Our spouse, our children, our career, our vocation, our reputation, whatever the case may be, idols can typically be good things. They are good things. An idol is something or someone that you trust in to save you. That's really the best definition of an idol that I can give you. That an idol is something or someone that you trust in to save you, which means that your relationships, your work, your reputation, all of these things can be idols. And we're going to look at that more specifically next week when we look at the second commandment. But what the first commandment addresses is the chief idol. The main idol. The idol that, in a sense, gives birth and life to all the other idols, and that's the idol of self. That's the idol that has been primary and premier since Genesis chapter 3. If you haven't visited our Liberate website, just liberate.org, you need to. There are lots and lots of amazing articles that are posted there every single week. There are videos. There are lots of things that you can go to find resources, both theological, practical, biblical, on the gospel and life and those sorts of things. But R.J. Grunwald wrote a piece at Liberate called The Me Generation, where he argued, because there are lots of people out there who say, well, this generation, the selfie generation, the technological generation, the Facebook and Twitter generation, this is the premier me generation of all generations. And he actually argued pretty compellingly that every generation is the me generation, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And this is what he said. Adam and Eve, wanting to believe the serpent, said, not God, me. In every generation from the beginning of time, sin has caused the human heart to say, me, me, me. Ever since the Garden of Eden, ever since Genesis chapter 3, you see, we primarily rely on ourselves to save ourselves. It's our natural default mode. If we can just please the right people and make the right grades and marry the right person and raise successful children and establish the right reputation and secure the important spots and be a part of the right network and all of those things, we can be saved. We are addicted, as you've heard me say over and over and over again, to self-salvation projects, going all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. It goes all the way back, and it all goes back to the doctrine of justification by works. We tend to think that this doctrine, justification by works, is for people who believe that their good works can get God to love them. Their good works can get God to approve of them. And we say, we don't believe in that. We say, by grace, you are saved through faith. And this not of yourselves, it's a gift of God. We believe that we are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in the finished work of Christ alone. And so, we're not guilty of believing in justification by works. But justification by works is not just a theological category and problem. It's a functional one. It's a practical one. It's something that we fall prey to each and every day. And this is what it is. I am what I do, and I am what I can become. I justify my existence by what I do. I validate myself by who I can become. And we give ourselves to this each and every day in 1,000 different ways, and it makes life just remarkably heavy. And at first, this idea that we can save ourselves is appealing. Just as it was to Adam and Eve. You can be like God. It seems promising. We all want to play the role of God. Just like Jim Carrey and Bruce Almighty, which, by the way, is an amazing movie, okay? You can call it blasphemous if you want. I don't see it that way. The way I read that movie, and it's not theologically correct, okay? It's Hollywood. It's not a theological textbook, that movie. But what's fascinating to me about that story, about that movie, is that, Jim Carrey actually thinks that if he could simply become God, he could make his life better. Because his life was falling apart. And so he's charging God with injustice. And God says, would you like to take the reins? And he says, I'd love to. And at first he's having a blast. He's kind of giving everybody their wishes, and, he's having a blast. He's blowing stuff up with his finger, and, he parts his tomato soup in the diner like the Red Sea, and, he's having a blast. But then he begins to realize that God's job is way too big for his small shoulders. And he actually, as a result of trying to be God, comes to the end of himself and gives the reins back to God. You see, at first, this idea that we can save ourselves is promising. It's appealing. In some sense, it's empowering. It's appealing just like it was to Adam and Eve. You can be like God, but you soon realize that trying to be God makes life heavy and hard. Being God is just too big of a job for all of us. No matter how hard we try, we can't control everything. We can't do everything. No matter how much effort we put forth, we are not one step closer to getting for ourselves the peace which transcends all understanding. The joy that only God can give. The satisfaction and the contentment that comes from God alone. See, Martin Luther called this posture, this way that we live trying to be God, the life of an unhappy God. Which in some sense marks all of us. It's a life marked by fear. I better make it, or else. I better accomplish this, or else. I better become someone, or else. My kids better turn out the way that I've always hoped and dreamed they'll turn out, or else. It's a life that is marked by fear. Well, in contrast to a heavy, hard life marked by fear, by putting ourselves in the place of God, faith, on the other hand, is life under grace. Grace which says, it's not up to you. You can't make it happen no matter how hard you try. Someone from above the sun has to come and make it happen for you. You see, on the cross, the seed of the woman crushed the head of the serpent, and by doing so, demolished all notions that we can ever make ourselves right, save ourselves, or set ourselves free. So the gospel is good news for those who have crashed and burned under the weight of trying to rescue themselves. Because the gospel is a declaration, a doxological declaration of good news that I don't need to save myself. I don't need to defend myself. I don't need to legitimize myself by what I do or who I can become or the people that I'm connected to or the way that I look or what people think of me. I don't need to justify myself. The gospel sets me free from the pressure to search high and low for happiness. The gospel announces that I am not on my own, that this is not on me, that I am far smaller and far